Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's episode of Ask Leah. On last week's episode, I had a great question about how to have a difficult conversation with a staff member about the fact that they're underperforming and the impact that's having on their colleagues. Now, in the comments in response to that episode over on LinkedIn, someone asked a great follow-up question. And that follow-up question was, in the current climate, how do you know if someone is underperforming or really struggling mental health wise and maybe feeling overwhelmed with the situation they find themselves in? You know, we're in a global pandemic. People are feeling anxious and not necessarily at their best. And I thought I would answer that question on tonight's episode because it is a great question. And the two things can be absolutely linked, because if you are struggling, you may well be underperforming. Not always. Some people will still perform at a high level, but oftentimes if someone's really struggling, their performance will suffer. That said, there can be people who are underperforming and it's not because they're struggling. It might be because they are being lazy or just disinterested or out of their depth, whatever might be going on. So, in answer to this question, the absolute key point is do not make assumptions. When you do assume, you make an ass out of you and me. It's an old saying, but gee, it's powerful, because so often we make assumptions that we know what's going on. Now, this doesn't just apply to work life, of course. This is in our personal lives as well. We assume someone meant to make us upset. We assume someone did that with a certain intent. And sure, sometimes we get it right, but oftentimes, because we're applying our thought process onto it, we do get it wrong, and sometimes we can fall flat on our face. So, how do we tell as leaders if our team member is underperforming or genuinely struggling? The first thing we want to do is to check in regularly. You know, make sure that you're not just managing and seeing the work coming through without connecting with your team. This is that whole concept of leading with warmth first, strength second. Now more than ever, it is crucial for leaders to be in regular contact with their team members to check in on how they are traveling. And, you know, I'd mentioned a couple of episodes ago, my favorite question at the moment is, how are you? But it's not the first time I ask, how are you? It's the second. Because I'll say to someone, how are you going? And they'll go, yeah, I'm going all right. And I'll say, great. Now my second question for you. How are you going? Really? And that's where I often get the gold of how someone's really traveling. So ask, check in, and really listen to the response you get. And that would be my second point. Listen to the response you get. The third point. I hope as leaders you're reframing the way you think about how your team operates at the moment. Now, I get there are some teams out there that need to stick to very strict hours. They start at this time, they end at that time. But I also know that there are a lot of teams out there who could be looking to work in different ways. And as a leader, please facilitate that where you can. You know, be focused on the output and outcomes that you're getting rather than the hours people are working. Don't micromanage. Encourage your people to take regular breaks through the day, okay? So that's something you can do to support them. Crucially, and if you haven't done this already, don't wait. Start it tomorrow, okay? You have to discuss shared expectations, okay? You can't expect someone to perform at a certain level if you haven't told them what level you want them to perform at. You know, if someone doesn't know they're underperforming, how can they do better? You need to make sure you have clearly articulated what good performance looks like. So then if they're not meeting that, you've got that foundation in place, and then you can have that conversation, which is my fifth point, around ask great questions. Okay, so if you're checking in regularly with someone and their work has dropped off, make sure you are asking great questions. Check in on how they're going. Ask them, you know, be that leader as coach. Ask them, you know, what do they think they're doing well? What's their biggest challenge at the moment? You know, what do they think they could do better? And through this conversation and asking great coaching questions, you'll quite quickly often get an idea of, is this person struggling? Are they self-aware enough to admit that maybe they're underperforming? Or are they oblivious, in which case you need to go back to those expectations and make it really clear what is expected of them at the moment. And then potentially have a conversation around, well, if they can't meet those expectations, what's going on there? But don't assume. It may be that they're struggling. It may be that there's something else going on that is making it challenging for them to meet their peak performance at this time, but don't assume. So I hope that answers your question, the difference between underperforming and struggling, and some tips for how you can work out what's going on. Thanks so much for tuning in, folks. If you have a communication or soft skill question you would like answered, send it through and I will do my best to answer it next week. Cheers.